All right.
For this activity, we're going to begin with activity 7.3, DNA profiling. In this case, we have a hypothetical crime scene investigation going on here. We're trying to figure out the suspects of a crime. We collected DNA at the crime scene, and we got subpoenas to collect blood from 2 suspects, and then we have their DNA as well. So now we're going to compare the DNA from the two suspects to the DNA at the crime scene using DNA fingerprinting. The way this works, to give you a little background here, how we're going to use this, we're using agarose gel electrophoresis. Now, I think if you remember back in lab 4, we talked about agar, and we use agar for our diffusion experiments. Well, agarose is just a more refined version of agar. So we use this in this technique. The way you prepare a gel for this, for electrophoresis, you would suspend powder in electrophoresis buffer, boil it at 100 degrees, it melts, it cools down to about 50 degrees centigrade. Then you can pour it into a mold. If you can see this mold here, this is the gel box. You pour your molten agarose in there with a little plastic comb already in place, all right? And so basically what happens when the gel solidifies, you can remove the comb and you've created wells in the gel. So that's how we start with. And then once your solidified gel is ready, you load that into, we call this gel box. And you can see the gel is placed in here. I can show you the wells there. And it's submerged in 1X, we call it TAE electrophoresis buffer, okay? And that's what fills up the tank. And if you observe the electrophoresis apparatus, we have red electrodes, which is a positive anode, and we have the black negative cathodes, okay? So it's very important when you load your gel that the wells that you're going to load your samples into are closest to the negative electrode. Because remember that under these conditions, the DNA fragments are all going to have a net negative charge. And when we apply a current, they are going to migrate through the agarose gel towards the positive electrode. We have to rely on this. That's why it's really important to have your gel oriented in the proper direction. So now, if you look here, these are the DNA samples that we have already prepared, and we're going to load these DNA samples into the corresponding wells. And if you look at your lab manual, they're already been labeled. A, B represents DNA from the crime scene, cut with 2 restriction enzymes. And we have DNA from suspect Nolt 1, cut with both the same restriction enzymes in C and D, and E and F represent suspect number 2. So now our task is to load these DNA samples into the wells in the gel electrophoresis apparatus. Now, we're working with really small quantities here. We're going to dispense 38 microliters of each sample into the well. And if you remember, a microliter, how many microliters in our liters? Anybody remember that? Well, micro meaning a million. There's 1 million microliters in a liter. So we're only going to be dispensing a very small drop corresponding to 38 microliters. And this is why we need a micropipetter. If you look closely here, this is an adjustable micropipetter. The maximum is 50 microliters. And so we can adjust this scale by just rotating the plunger. And I'm going to set the numbers at 38 microliters. So, how do we use a micropipetter? Well, I'm right-handed, it's in my right hand, and again, it's thumb-driven. You can see the plunger here with my thumb on the top. Well, we need a pipette tip, and so to put a pipette tip on, we simply take the micropipetter and press it gently down onto a tip, and it should seat the tip on the bottom of the micropipetter, okay? So, there's some tips at the back of the manual if you want to read up on some proper technique of using a micropipetter. I can just describe and demonstrate the use. So, for example, let's start with DNA sample A, and that would be dispensed into the first well. Opening this DNA sample up. Now, for me to pipette 38 microliters, I would simply press my thumb down till I gently feel the first stop on the plunger, okay? And I would introduce, I'll show you on this side so you can see that. I would just introduce the tip of the micropipette pipette tip into the solution and gently watch my thumb go up. It goes up very slowly and deliberately, drawing up 38 microliters in my tube, in my pipette. Now, final check is you should never see any air drop, any air bubbles at the bottom. If you see any air bubbles at the bottom of the tip, you didn't dispense, you didn't draw up enough solution. So always check, double check to see you don't see any air bubbles. Well, I don't have any air bubbles, so I'm confident I have 38 microliters in this, in the tip. So I'm going to load that into a preformed well in the agarose gel. And I'm going to start by convention, looking at the gel. We always load from left to right. All right, so the first sample A would go in the furthest leftmost well. And to do this, and basically I'm going to rest the tip of my pipette on the edge, topper edge of the well, and slowly depress the plunger. See how slowly it's going down? And I can see the solution flowing out into my well. When I dispense it all, I keep the plunger just depressed and pull it out. If you look closely, then you can see the sample in the well gel. Okay, so now think about this. We always have to use a new pipette tip for each sample because we don't want any carrier, we don't want any contamination. So this has a unique feature. You actually can depress this little lever here, and it'll actually dispense, knock off the old tip. So we can get a new tip now, and we can continue on with sample B. I finished loading all 6 samples into the well. As you can see that each well has a corresponding sample in it, and going from left to right, we have A out to F. So now we have all the samples in the well. Now we have to apply a current to this gel, and the way we do that is simply place the lid very gently, because at this point you do not want to move or jostle the gel at all, because the sloshing of the buffer could wash your samples right out of the wells and you have to start over. So just be very gentle at this point. And then we're going to connect the wire electrodes over to a power supply. And if you can see closely on this power supply can actually run 2 gels simultaneously because we have 2 ports for the electrodes. So we're going to choose the top row for the negative and the positive. Okay, and now we have to determine how much voltage we want to apply to the gel. Now this gel, we have 2 choices, is 75 volts or 150 volts. Now 150 volts you can run the gel faster, but a lot of times you would be so much resistance to the gel you might create too much heat, which is not good. So I'm going to select 75 volts. So simply by hitting the 75 volt toggle, I'm applying 75 volts across that gel. Now, I don't know if you can see this in the video, but I can explain this. If you want to know whether you're generating your current through your gel, there's 2 wire electrodes at the bottom of the tank. And if you look very closely, if you can see bubbles being generated off of those, that tells you you have a current flowing through. And I can see the bubbles coming off the anode, which is a good sign. So now we are passing 75 volts through the gel. So what's happening now? Remember I told you before that under these conditions, DNA has a net negative fragment, a negative charge, I should say. And remember the shape of the DNA, they're all in single strand, they're all in fragments, linear fragments. And so the only thing that's separating these is basically the size of each fragment. So we're relying on the fact that each fragment is a different size. And think back to when we used in lab 4, when the dye particles diffuse to the agar. Remember, the smaller dye particles diffuse faster than the large dye particles. And so this is the same principle here. Smaller DNA fragments are going to go through the agarose, the pores in the agarose faster than the larger DNA fragments. And at the end of the electrophoresis, they should separate themselves on the basis of size alone. So we're going to run this for approximately 90 minutes. And at that point, they'll be sufficiently separated for us to determine a difference. Okay, is that? We destain the gel for about three 10-minute changes with warm water. And what the purpose of that is to remove almost all getting rid of the background stain for the agarose gel, so that will lose the dye, but the DNA fragments will retain the dye, so it makes it more visible. And this is a pattern that you will want to look at to answer the questions about which suspect was at the crime scene. Now, it's easy to see the higher molecular weight bands up here at the top of the gel because they retain more of the dye. The lower molecular weight ones down here, you can see them. Here's one, here's one, here's one. But look very carefully. There's another lower molecular weight DNA fragment way down here, one here, and in lane F. So don't forget, don't miss B and F have something down lower. So that's a pattern you want to draw. You can make sure you note that this fragment is a little bit higher than these three, and this one is a little bit higher. Now, to interpret a DNA fingerprinting or profiling, since we use two separate restriction enzymes, you have to compare the fragments created by both enzymes together. So, for example, the crime scene DNA cut with two restriction enzymes are located in A and B. Look at that pattern. And just kind of look, can you superimpose the pattern A and B over the pattern suspect 1 in C and D? Does that pattern look the same? I don't think so. But what happens if you superimpose the DNA fragments from the crime scene on E and F, which is suspect number 2? Where do they match? Where does A and B match? And that will help you determine which suspect committed the crime or was present at the crime scene.